Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land. This is your t-shirted historian. It's another episode of Dungeons and Discussions. And, well, I guess I'm flying solo today. Don't know where my associate Grim is. But in any case, the show must go on, as it were. I only hope I can actually fill the entire hour. So, today's topic of discussion is cheating. So I guess most people don't think, well, I mean, TTRPGs are a game like anything else. So a lot of people don't think of, cheating in the traditional sense, I suppose. It's kind of like not like cheating at gambling or something else like that, but the actual Oxford Dictionary definition of cheating is to act dishonestly or unfairly in order to gain an advantage, especially in a game or examination, or also to avoid something undesirable by luck or skill. So, when we look at cheating as in TTRPGs, it kind of takes several different forms. And I don't necessarily think any of them are justified. There are various reasons why you shouldn't cheat. Obviously, if you're a GM, you're allowed to, quote unquote, cheat. Because you arbitrate the world, you run things, you set up the scenarios, etc. Cheating as a GM can mean a couple of different things. One, it can mean fudging dice rolls favorably or unfavorably towards your players, which that's a pretty horrible thing to do. We had an entire video on why fudging is bad. But just to kind of recap things, fudging is bad just because it creates distrust. It creates distrust between you and your players. It creates kind of a sense of unfairness in the way that if you fudge dice rolls, players will come to expect that you will fudge dice rolls for any benefit, say you decide you want to fudge dice rolls in favor of a bad encounter. Oops. That character would have been killed by that natural 20 that orc rolled on his attack roll. Because it would have been a critical hit. Well, I just kind of fudged the dice to make it just a regular hit. Or even a miss. Okay, well, and in some ways, you might think you're justified in doing this. But you're not, because what you're doing is you're creating a set of unfavorable circumstances. You're cheating on behalf of the player. And although it is well-intentioned, it isn't good. Because if you expected the outcome to be so favorable towards the players every single time something happens, then why would you roll at all? It kind of seems like you would need to be playing a different kind of game. Maybe something that's more skill-based or more attribute-based. Give you a good example. I run Zombicide, and one of the things that happens during that game is when the zombies attack, they deliver all of their damage. Players have the opportunity to mitigate some of that with evasion rolls. However, any of the damage that gets through is assigned to players. Now, The nice thing is the players actually get to determine how that damage is assigned. So let's say, you've got one guy who's got 2 hit points and you've got somebody else who's got like 5, and there's like 4 points of damage coming in. Well, the 2 players can choose between themselves how much of that damage each of them wants to take. One guy could take all 4 points, or they could, kind of divide it up. One guy takes 1 point, and the other one takes the other 3. And that's a nice way of doing it, and it doesn't involve a DM having to get involved and fudge dice or anything else. In other words, it kind of keeps everybody honest because they determine how much damage they're actually taking. And that's an example of a system you could use if you're that worried about having to roll damage dice against your players. But otherwise, let the dice fall where they may, good or bad, because it doesn't benefit anybody by fudging a dice roll. You might think it's cheating to benefit a player. It really isn't. It creates an atmosphere of distrust. Or, worse, it creates an atmosphere of dependence. And you don't want that in your game. You don't want players to depend on you to fudge dice every time the chips are down, or every time they get into a bad encounter, every time they have a bad dice roll, or every time they miss a certain check. Matter of fact, while we're talking about missing checks and things, and hey guys, there is metagaming, obviously, which is the biggest form of cheating. I'll get to that here in a minute. I also kind of view optimization as a form of cheating. Now, when I say optimization, let me be clear. There's a difference between building a character who is designed to do one thing and do it very well. And then there's the people who absolutely are trying to get every last minutia of points out of their character builds. And I don't think this was so much of a problem back in a lot of the early TTRPGs. But where you started to see it happening a lot was games with point-buy systems like GURPS. And nowadays, you're seeing a lot of it with, well, like anything. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition has it pretty bad. It has a meta. 3rd edition was really bad about introducing that. Pathfinder 1st edition was really bad about doing that. And certain other games that involve point buying or min-maxing tend to be very bad. And why do I consider this a form of cheating? Well, think about it like this. Okay. Let's take Pathfinder, for example. Okay. One of the most important checks that you have in Pathfinder is your perception checks, right? Your ability to notice things or to not notice things. You're going to find that in a lot of game systems, especially more modern ones, perception checks, spot checks, whatever you want to call them, are hugely important to the game because everybody is constantly either rolling those themselves by, they're being asked to roll spot checks or perception checks by the GM, or they are, being passively checked by the GM. So it's an important skill. However, I kind of view this as a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if a perception check is so important to an encounter that it absolutely is something that the players should not miss, or it'll be such a huge detriment to the players that they miss it. The GM might want to think about not including something like this. You know, oh, if you guys had spotted that one crucial piece of evidence that you needed in order to crack that case, well, things might have turned out differently. Well, I mean, when you put it down to a dice roll, things happen. People miss things. So if it's that crucial to your plot, maybe think about not putting it on a dice roll. Maybe not putting it on a check. Because that invites cheating. It can invite cheating either on your behalf as a GM, like, I really need these players to notice this thing, so I'm going to artificially lower the difficulty without them knowing it so that they pass that check, so that my plot can continue. And that is a form of railroading, which is also, in my opinion, a form of cheating. But let's take a look at the player who min-maxes their perception checks or something. Okay, let's say like Pathfinder 1st Edition. Okay. Let's say you take a race and you want to max out your perception. Okay, so you could pick up an elf, right? I think they get a +2 on perception to start with. I believe it's been a while since I've played, but I believe perception is either a wisdom or an intelligence-based skill. I think it's intelligence-based. If it's wisdom, then my bad. But if it's intelligence-based, you pick an elf. Elf has got a perception bonus of +2. They naturally get a buff in intelligence. Let's say you manage to somehow get an 18 on your dice. You throw your 18 on your intelligence. So you're already getting a +4. You get another +2 on that. So now you get a 20 on that stat. I don't know if I can do my calculator on this. Let me see if I can bring that up real quick. Oh, I need more caffeine here. All right. So your character has a +2 from their perception for their race. They get, let's see, if they have an 18, they get a +4. Let's say they get a +2 on intelligence, so that's going to stack it up to a +5, right? But let's say you also drop one of your other things, because you can add traits on and stack your traits up so that you get another +2. This is all possible, by the way, and this is rules legal. So I'm just pointing this out. And then let's say you pick up the feat that also gives you bonuses on your perception checks. Well, there's another +2 right there. Let's say you pick a class, such as, I believe Rogue takes perception as a class skill. All right. So that gives you a 1 point in your skill, but it also gives you a virtual 3 points. Wow. You're all the way up to a 15. A 15 on your perception checks. And this is at first level. This is not, anything advanced. And there might be other ways you can eke out some more points, but I'm just saying, just straight up off the character creation build. Now, yeah, you did have to do kind of a lot of jury rigging to make this happen. You had to have a natural 18 for one thing. But otherwise, having a +15 for a perception check at level 1 is ridiculous, especially on a D20 roll. Because it's kind of like anything short of a 4, you're probably going to make that check. In which case, it becomes kind of a non-starter. I mean, it's like, why does your GM ever need to make perception checks? He knows you're always pretty much going to make it. You know, I was like, you got a plus 15. You're almost never going to miss that check. Almost never. The only way the GM can do something about your perception being that high, if, say, he doesn't want you to notice something, like, let's say his encounter for that night is he's got a big ambush to hit the party with, because his plan is, like, okay, well, the party's going to get ambushed, they're going to get taken down by a bunch of goblins or something and kidnapped and taken away to secret lair so plot can continue. Well, I mean, first off, that can be a little bit railroady, so that's a form of cheating to begin with. But just for example, let's say that they're justified in it. Like, this was the name of the game. You knew this was gonna happen at some point. He's got to find some way to get around your 15 perception, and he may have to cheat to do it. He may have to artificially inflate the stats of an opponent. It's like, okay, well, I know the player has a 15 perception, so now I have to have a critter that can oppose that check, so I'm going to have to stack stats the opposite direction in order to overcome him. GMs are within their rights to do this kind of stuff, but it still kind of sucks to have to. I mean, as a GM, if you're having to build encounters in order to blow through, overcome, or otherwise circumvent the player's abilities in such a, let's be honest, an obvious way, to me, that is kind of like another form of cheating. And if you haven't noticed, kind of one of the things I'm hinting at here is cheating begets cheating. And it happens on both sides. And it's not good for anybody, because it just creates a lot of feelings of distrust. The players don't trust their GM. The GM isn't having any fun because he's having to work against his players actively, instead of just being able to kind of passively let the story tell itself and let the sandbox work on its own, or let the adventure work out on its own. But there's other forms of min-maxing that are a lot more insidious than that. You've got players who will... This was more common back in the old days. Back in the old days, I should say, min-maxing was a little less prevalent, I suppose. You still kind of had it, but you had to work a little bit more at it. And I suppose this was probably because of the way the systems were done. If you were like old school, hardcore, everybody sat down at the table and you rolled 3d6 for stats all the way down the line. That sure made min-maxing a lot harder. As a matter of fact, back in those days, if you had characters who turned into paladins or monks or even rangers, that was kind of amazing, because getting the proper set of stats on the dice, your player had to be really, really lucky on the dice rolls, or have a set of loaded dice, in which case they were cheating to begin with. But yeah, for the most part, players back in those days, if they wanted to cheat, and they would do this by the rules, obviously, they'd buy magic items. You'd get magic items that would give you all kinds of stuff, like Scarab of Protection, which gives you a chance to defend against anything, right? Doesn't matter what it is. Certain other things, they'd basically stack magic items to the point where it became a game of magic versus magic, or it forced GMs to have to use lots of anti-magic in order to stop that. Which, again, that's another form of adversarial GMing, or having to force the GM to actively work against your party in order to overcome it. And looking at other things, you have people who will try to eke out every last point, like let's say for armor class or something like that. It's like, oh, I've got this kind of my dexterity is like this, and I'm wearing this kind of armor, and then I'm wearing these rings of protection, etc., etc. So my AC total is like 25 or something ridiculous like this, and that's not impossible to do. I've seen people with ACs that were in their 30s. Um, it's like, were you expecting to not get hit this entire game? Because usually what happens is whenever you have somebody who's got an AC that's that high, the GM ends up having to implement things like critical hits. It's like, okay, well, the only thing that can hit you is a crit, a natural 20. So half the time when that player is getting hit, it's with crits. So of course they're taking more damage. They're getting pissed because even though they're not getting hit that much, every time they're getting hit, their character's basically getting the shit kicked out of them every single hit, even if it's not happening that often. But that creates feelings of mistrust, anger, dislike, resentment. It's not fun. It's not fun for your GM because he feels bad probably having to do it or it happening. And of course, the player himself, is pissed because it's like, damn it, I worked so hard to get my AC up to this level, and you're just, every time you're critting me, you're just taking half my hit points away. Well, you made it so hard for me to hit you that, the only thing I could hit you with was a crit. So, this is the repercussions. This is the consequences of your actions. It's not cool. It's not fun. And it's almost, like I said, a form of cheating in and of itself. Now I understand building a character to do certain specific things that are kind of fun. Like okay, I really wanted a character who, in one of my Pathfinder games, I built a character whose whole shtick was having a reach weapon. So basically, anytime somebody would enter within the sphere of his reach weapon, he could get an AOO, an automatic attack, before he ever reached the target. And that was kind of my thing, I don't really necessarily think that's so much a form of cheating so much as it's just kind of a character that's just kind of built to do one specific thing and do it really well. And, it's not really game breaking. If you get your barbarian who can be like really awesome when they're raging, that's not really game breaking, Or you get your wizard who's like optimized to throw that one really, really awesome fireball or something like that. That's not really so much game breaking. Where it gets game breaking is you get the characters who stack on all the different stuff that makes them really good all the time at everything. And I see this happen with magic users more than anything else, which is probably why I resent magic users in games so much, because let's be honest, I mean, if you look at the spell systems in most games, the magic users have all the advantages. They have all the abilities that can circumvent every other class in the game. Because past a certain level, you don't need a rogue or a thief in your party, because the wizard can pop the doors open, can detect the traps, can pretty much do everything that replaces the thief. I mean, yes, he's burning through spells to do it, but still, I think it's a form of circumventing niche protection when you do that. And then, of course, I thought the most egregious things I ever saw were, in Pathfinder First Edition, they had a class called the Arcanist. Then the Arcanist is really cool because they could take spells from any other class as a part of their feat buildups and archetypes. Well, we eventually had an Arcanist who could basically cast all the mage spells, which already made them super duper powerful, especially, when you consider all the spells that are available in the spell books. But they were also able to pick up clerical spells. So, yeah, imagine that. Somebody who has taken the niche protection away from the cleric and has all the power of the wizard, which has pretty much circumvented all the other classes. You can imagine that's not a really fun character to have to adventure with. How much fun is it? It's kind of like, oh, well, the wizard's got this taken care of every single time. You're pretty much just showing up there either to be a meat shield for the wizard or be a flunky for the wizard at that point. I mean, because why are you there? He can do everything you can't, or everything you can do plus more. And that's not fun. That's not fun for you. That is, in my opinion, it's kind of a form of cheating in and of itself. Now, I mean, the player may not necessarily be looking at it that way. They may not be intentionally doing this because they want to cheat or they want to get an advantage. It's just, we do have legitimate cases of players whose character, who kind of have a pass-fail mentality. They do have kind of a I don't want to fail at anything mentality, and they view the game as kind of a form of pass-fail, or as a challenge to be overcome rather than a way to have fun for a few hours. And I play with a person like this. I have a player I've played with for well over 20 years. He very much has a kind of the mentality that the GM is the adversary, and that the game is a game you can win, and that he has to have an answer to everything the GM can do. When the truth is, the GM can do anything. And of course, it pisses him off when the GM throws something at him that the GM specifically had to create, engineer, or otherwise bring into play in order to counter his particular style of play. As it would. Because, of course, that player sees the GM as cheating. Oh, well, you're cheating because you're using all this stuff that's specifically designed to, to keep my character down. Right? Whereas the GM is looking at the player and going, well, you're cheating by having a character who pretty much can't be stopped by anything other than me resorting to this. Cheating begets cheating. But let's see. Let's take a look at some comments we got here. I really wish I had my co-host here. I definitely would have enjoyed Grimm's input on this. But Kit Marlowe says, min-maxing is just boring. If one wants to play a game that depends on probability and statistics, go and play Risk. Yeah. And there are systems out there that are more engineered to counter system. There's a game I have just picked up, and I need to look over the rules for it. But it plays a little bit more like counters and counters. There's less probability involved. It's called Panic at the Dojo, and I need to read up more on it before I give an assessment on it or decide to play it myself. But from the look of it, it's kind of a case of everybody kind of has powers and counters and things in play, and they're kind of looking to overcome each other or overcome each other's build and that sort of thing. But there's not a lot of dice rolling involved. It's a lot of assigning of stuff. It's in a way, it's kind of video gamey, which I don't know. Let's face it, TTRPGs these days are a bit like video games. But like video games, like I said, TTRPGs have their own built-in cheat codes as well. Malaquin says, you don't care if a player min-maxes because if he does, he will suck at something else. Well, here's the thing. Min-maxers, if you think about it, most min-maxers min-max everything so that they don't suck at something else. If you're building a character who is just really, really good at one thing and one thing only, that's not really so much min-maxing. It's just kind of like, okay, I just really want to be able to do this one thing really, really well. And that's okay. As long as it's not stepping on everybody else's toes, as long as it's not, depriving other people of having a good time by whatever you're choosing to do, it's okay. Like, you've got the thief who is just really, really, really good at spotting traps or something. It's like, okay, well, that's his job. You would kind of want him to be really good at that. I don't really see that as a problem. He's within his niche. Or you got the fighter who has optimized his build to where he can deal lots and lots of damage or get lots and lots of attacks in per round. It's like I can understand that. That's not really so much game breaking. That's his job. You don't so much mind a character who's good at their job. But it's when you have characters who are good at all the jobs, good at every job, then that's when you get min-maxing that kind of devolves into cheating. And yeah, Kit's right on this. Yeah, we have too many systems that are lean too hard on certain stats. Yeah, no one in Call of Cthulhu ever maxes out accounting over spot hidden. Yeah, exactly. For years, I have said that dexterity is an overpowered stat. And the reason I say dexterity is an overpowered stat is because it does too much. It has too many game benefits. What can you do with dexterity? Okay. If I have an 18 dexterity, number one, I'm getting a super duper high armor class, or I'm getting a better armor class than I would because all the pluses I'm getting from that are adding into my AC. If I decide to become like a ranged type character, I'm getting benefits to hit from my dexterity as well. But on top of all that, reflex saves are dexterity based. So by maxing out my dexterity and building around it, being super duper high, I've basically covered 3 bases of the game very neatly. So having a super duper high dexterity, absolutely vital. A lot of people say, oh, well, having a super duper high con is really important. Yeah, it's more hit points, and it's more important for fortitude saves. So that's a pretty good overpowered stat, I would say. Any stat where you get more than one benefit out of it is a big deal. But con doesn't usually play a big point in a lot of your skill checks, whereas Dex does, because Dex also plays into a lot of your skill checks, like athletics and that sort of stuff. Whereas strength kind of really doesn't. Strength is good for damage. It might be good for lifting stuff or carrying stuff, but seriously, I don't think there's too many characters out there who, show me the players who built up a super duper huge carrying capacity. As part of their min-max strategy. Yep, my name is Pack Mule. That's my whole job. I maxed out my strength so I could carry more shit than everybody else in the game. Nah. Hungar says, don't cheat, it's gay. Yes, agreed. If a munchkin wants to min-max and he finds it fun, you let it fly at your table and provide him chances to use it while providing other challenges for the players who don't min-max. But how well does that work? Because if you're a munchkin and you min-max and you have all kinds of stuff that can do everything that kind of treads on everybody else's fun, then how do you stop that from happening? You know, it's a case of, well, I got the one character who's min-maxed for this, but he also gets some tangible benefits in other areas, because that inevitably happens, especially in derived skill-based games. Maliquin says, or actually Kit says, comes with the territory as a competent GM. You don't think you're making an ethical judgment, merely a style preference, system mastery. Pathfinder doesn't interest me at all. Well, I like Pathfinder. It's definitely a nice step up from 3.0, 3.5, but Pathfinder has the same problem that those two games do, and that is it's a game of pluses when it comes down to it at the end of the day. You have lots and lots of pluses. Mal, you started out as a self-professed munchkin and still have an odd urge to be a min-maxer. Yeah, you do. Yes, you do, sir. There's no doubt that being competent at things is a legit desire among players, but at some point, competence shades into meta-knowledge exploitation. Yeah, and that's something I haven't gotten into is meta-knowledge exploitation. But that is another thing. This didn't start happening until the 3.0 era, and it has continued into the 5th edition era. There is definitely meta builds. And in and of themselves, they may not seem like cheating, but they kind of are. Treant Monk, who is somebody who I love him very much. I think his guides are really good, and I've used them before. Unfortunately, I've used them before. I've also used a lot of RPG bots stuff when I was building for Pathfinder. Why? Because, well, I was already in the group with a bunch of other munchkins and min-maxers and power gamers, and, try as I might, I tried to play the fair character, the one who rolled everything straight and tried to build characters for fun and enjoyment, and not so much, I'm going to be the most powerful character at everything. Which is one of the reasons why I hold the record number of deaths in my party. My characters have died more times than anybody else in the party because I steadfastly refused to min-max. You can imagine that's not fun for me. But it is what it is, rather stick to my principles than cheat. But yeah, we have meta builds. In that meta builds there are people out there who have crunched all the numbers, they've looked at all the data, they've seen how it plays into the average gaming session, so they know that these things are going to be more powerful than other things. I'll give you an example. The perception spot checks, right? Everybody knows they're important. Everybody knows you're going to be asked to do those, whether passively or not. So people will try to bump those up artificially, knowing that, hey, it's part of the meta. It's very rare to see somebody, who builds a character who has just crap perception. If they have crap perception, it's because either they were straight rolling the dice, or they really weren't thinking about it, or they intentionally wanted to build a character who was basically Mr. Magoo in the dungeon. Can't see 2 feet in front of his face. But most players don't want to miss out on stuff. They don't want to miss the rolls. They don't want to miss the checks. They don't want to miss out on some aspect of the game. And so they use metagaming / min-maxing / whatever you want to call it as their form of quote unquote cheating. Yeah, PF players who map out their character leveling from the very start. If I take feat X and Y, so by level A, I'll be able to do B. Yeah. 3.0 was extremely bad about that because from the beginning they decided that a player who maps out their character build from beginning to end would have a greater reward than one who just rolled the dice and played. And that was a huge mistake. And that trend is actually continuing into the current era. And one of the worst things that they ever did was introduce prestige classes. Because prestige classes required you to take certain levels in order to get certain benefits in order to meet the requirements of the prestige class. So what you ended up with were characters who were basically cookie cutter, by the book. We're trying to get into this prestige class because this prestige class is so much more powerful. Some examples of that were like, I think it was like the Leyline Walker or something like that, the class that could take, clerical and mage spells. It's like, yeah, they maybe weren't as good as a mage or a cleric who, leveled up from 1 to 10. But the fact that they had access to both kinds of spells, and eventually, once they got into their prestige class, they were going up in both types of spells every single level, meant that by the time you got to 20, even though that character may not be able to necessarily push the highest level spells, they still had such a huge repertoire to pick from that they were almost unstoppable. They had other classes that were pretty super duper powerful, like Eldritch Knight and stuff like that too. You think most players eventually grow out of it as long as the GM is understanding it shows them other ways to play? I disagree with you, Mal. And the main reason I disagree with you is because, again, been gaming at a table with the same guy for over 20 years. He's been that way from the beginning, even before I ever met him. From what I understand from people I've talked to, he's still that way to this day. He still views TTRPGs as a win-lose. He still builds characters to win, to win, to win. And if he can't win just on the meta build itself, he will find ways to win using purchased or found magic items. Yes, winning D&D is boring. Remove ego from the equation. Realize it's about enjoying the story and adding in your own flavor to it cooperatively. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and there's merit to blowing dice rolls. Sometimes it can be pretty funny. It gives GMs a chance to describe action kind of in a hilarious manner. Like you have two badass characters who are going swinging swords at each other, and they both roll like a 1 or a 2 or something like that. It's like, So for 6 seconds, you have two characters who are basically doing all these really cool, kung fu kata type things against each other. They're swinging swords back and forth, leaping, dodging, everything else, and completely missing each other like it's choreographed. That's kind of funny. You think most munchkins are into the power fantasy as opposed to simply winning? Possibly. And I could understand that. A lot of people play games because they want to have the power fantasy. The problem is like not everybody who comes to the table is also like them. Some people just want to roll up and have a good time and, let the chips fall where they may, let the story dictate what it is. They don't necessarily want to be like the superhero. Although, as I've said on more than one occasion, every single character at the table, every single player believes that their character is the hero of the story. And the sad part is when it comes to them metagaming, cheating, fudging, whatever you want to call it, as a means to not look bad. You know, and I think that tends to play into a lot of games, unfortunately, because you have a lot of, like I said, a lot of players who view the game as pass fail, win lose. Oh no, I missed a dice roll. You don't know enough about RPG World to judge whether players routinely grow out of munchkinning. Yeah. Takes time for them to realize that there's more than most games. The power fantasy. GM for 40 years and watch most munchkins, you know, grow out of it, including you. I don't know. Some do, some don't. I think it kind of largely depends on the rest of the group that you're with. Like I said, if you're in a group with a bunch of people who are power gamers, you kind of end up having to power game also, because if you don't, the GM's not going to make adjustments for you. As my GM famously told me, if you have characters in the party that have like a 30 AC or whatever like that, and I have to be able to make creatures that can hit that AC, you know, anybody else is fair game also. So if you're not building your character to be at that level, then you know, you're just fucked. You are. It's kind of a game of nuclear escalation. Each side is building up their arsenal bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, of course, the GM is the final say on the size of the arsenal, and unfortunately, his arsenal is a lot bigger than the players when it comes down to it. Because you know, but like I said, then of course the GM looks like the bad guy. They look like the ones who are cheating because they are more or less having to cheat or metagame in order to defeat their players. And then it becomes adversarial. Nobody's having fun, like I said. It's just bad. Hey, Delver, who's cheating at D&D? Who do you need to pour acid on? Delver, did you see a lot of cheaters in your early gaming or in your AD&D gaming so much? I mean, I don't see AD&D having a lot of meta builds. I don't necessarily say all the classes are balanced, because some of them are obviously more powerful, but that tends to happen at later levels. You know, because early on, you know, your wizard at first, your magic user at first level versus your fighter at first level. Yeah, obviously your magic user doesn't have too much of a leg to stand on. You know, wizard versus fighter in a one-on-one confrontation at first level, the fighter's usually going to win that one. But then when you get, let's say, the 10th level and it's fighter versus wizard or fighter versus magic user, yeah, I don't think the fighter has a chance. Or not much of one anyway. Not without lots and lots of magic items. And of course, that can be kind of a form of cheating, because again, you're metagaming. You think the issue is that mechanically optimized build is a bucket of stats, not a character, because the character is almost all systems is not defined by mechanics at all. Yeah, I agree. If you're just stacking stats to win or to not fail, then, you know, why are you really playing? Okay, if you don't want numeric stats, you should be playing a story game, not a role-playing game. It is a game, and numbers are an important part of the game. Oh, I agree. But here's the problem. As I said before with my first example of a character with a 15 perception, because everything is dice rolled and because everything has a difficulty class or a certain bar to success or failure, you have people who will stack the numbers in such a way as to put every advantage in their corner. They're metagaming, basically. They're metagaming without actually metagaming. They're not metagaming in the sense of, oh, I read the GM's module, so I know what's supposed to happen, which is also a form of cheating, which is extremely bad form, which is really horrible and very sad, and you should not do that because that's just straight up cheating. I mean, it's like, oh, yeah, don't jump into the green devil's mouth in Tomb of Horrors because that has a sphere of annihilation in there. Yeah. Or you see the players who just actively avoid those things. It's like, no matter how many times you stick it out there for them like that, and it's like, well, you see this interesting lever sticking out of the wall. We don't touch it. Oh, okay. But why wouldn't you touch it? I mean, you have no reason to believe that this lever will do anything bad to you. No. We're not going to touch it. Okay. If you're stacking stats, if you're stacking numbers to favor you in all the confrontations and all the dice rolls and all the checks, then you're gaming the game. Give you a good example. Okay, GURPS Supers is one of the best examples I know of. Okay, in the rules themselves, they tell you, yes, it is possible to build basically godlike characters. They gave a couple of examples of builds you could create using the GURPS Supers point buy rules, right? One of them was like, I don't remember what, but the other one was, nicknamed Azathoth. It's the guy who basically sits at the center of the universe and he can basically blow himself up for, I don't know how many ridiculous amounts of damage. I mean, it was like stupid amount of damage, like 100 D6s worth of damage. And then can instantly reform because, he had all the right quirks, all the right disadvantages, etc., in order to min-max to where his play style was basically, it's kind of like, you can't touch me. They tell you, don't do that, because it's not fun for anybody. And it's the same thing with any role-playing game. If you're in a game with a character who is, optimized to be a certain niche, or built a certain direction, a certain way, and everybody understands that's how they're building their character. It's like, okay, well, that's his niche. He's the fighter. He wants to tank everything. So he's got lots of hit points and he's got, high armor class because he wants to stand in front of everybody and take all the hits. And then you got somebody who's a high DPS because he likes to deal lots and lots of damage. And a lot of that comes out of the, kind of the MMO RPG era type of thing, where you had builds that are basically meta designed to, beat world bosses and stuff like that. And I think a lot of players kind of still live on that kind of competitive edge. They don't necessarily see the game as a way to have fun so much as just to numerically destroy their opponent. How much fun is it in Ravenloft? If you're playing Ravenloft, if the first time you encounter Strahd, your character is so overpowered that they can basically defeat Strahd the very first time they meet him. Now, obviously, there's rules set up in the game to keep that from happening because, the GM is advised, like, oh, no, if Strahd's getting his ass beat, he disappears and runs off to go heal himself or whatever and lets the rest of the castle, chew up at them. But let's say you got your player who's like, a paladin. He's like super duper optimized, maximized to kill vampires. And he just gets that lucky that lucky one roll and manages to defeat Strahd immediately on the first encounter. It's like, well, okay. The GM has just, been shown that his big bad guy is not shit. I mean, the players can take him out in one round very easily. That's not fun for a GM, because a GM is like going like, well, okay, here's this adventure I spent money on, and I, took time to research and all this other stuff, and so now I either have to artificially inflate this character's stats in order to overcome what the PCs have done, or I have to find other things in the dungeon to, overcome these characters in other ways. Like I said, it becomes like a game of nuclear escalation. It's like, okay, well, I'm building up all my shit to beat your shit. Now we're not having fun. We're just basically rolling numbers against each other to see who's going to win. And I'm sorry, but the GM is going to win because the GM has more shit he can throw at you. The GM can artificially escalate, inflate, create whatever they want to. They can hurt your character in so many different ways. It's like you never get a chance to rest. You never get a chance to heal. You constantly under assault all the time. If it comes down to an adversarial GM versus adversarial players, I'm sorry, the GM's going to win every time. But everybody's going to lose, because at some point the players are going to get sick of that. They're going to want to get up and leave the table, or they're just not going to want to play anymore. And everybody loses. And that's not fun. Cheating, not fun. Cheating, bad for everybody. Yeah, basically doing what Gary warned DMs about not allowing it. It's the spirit of the rules, not the letter, which is important. Never allow some barracks room lawyer to dictate to you. Yeah, rules lawyering. I do kind of see rules lawyering as a little bit of cheating, but kind of yes, kind of no. I mean, how much rule bending is up to you, is cheating or not. If you're DM, I guess it kind of falls into fudging territory. But I do think that once you have a rule established, you kind of got to stick with it. Otherwise, yeah, you're basically falling into fudging territory, which is cheating. Still bad. If it goes against the obvious intent of the game, yeah, I agree. Kit Marlowe. And there is an argument for saying that rules light systems, even something like systemless play, obviates the need for cheating, but this requires experienced or talented players on the same page. Yeah. I suppose something like Vampire the Masquerade is kind of a system where I guess it depends on the kind of game that they're playing. I played a really weird game of Vampire the Masquerade once. Most of the time people play Vampire the Masquerade, you're expecting, a lot of intrigue, maybe some combat and stuff like that. And just a certain level of higher level kind of intellectual play. Well, that's not the game that we were playing. This guy was running Vampire pretty much like it was any other fantasy RPG. And it became apparent very quickly that characters who were built to take advantage of social systems and social interactions and stuff like that were probably not going to do well. Whereas the one guy in the game who was playing the gargoyle was like unbelievably successful at everything. I mean, he almost couldn't be hurt because the gargoyle is so optimized to combat, so optimized to be able to survive. And that game really quickly became a drag for me, I should say, because here I am trying to play, like a Malkavian, dual personality, conniving weirdo type, and we're constantly being thrown into fight, fight or flight scenarios, and it's just kind of like, well, okay, we're get into another fight. Guess my character will either sit this one out or try to make themselves, obfuscated so nobody sees me because I ain't gonna go and get into a fight because I'm gonna get my ass kicked. Just sit back and we'll let the gargoyle handle everything. That's fun. Most rules light games are the ones that are often abused in this manner, of course. Yeah. I don't know. Rules light games, it really depends. It depends on the game on that one, This is why who you play with is everything. Yes, playing rules light with the wrong players for GM would be a disaster. It requires an ability to play for the story, not for the win. Yeah, exactly. Mal, the con games, from what I remember, and granted, I haven't been to that many cons and haven't played that many con games, but for the most part, the con games, they gave you a lot of pre-gens. And hear me out on this. I know a lot of people are gonna, want to throw me under a bus for saying this, but pre-gens are kind of a way to, at least initially, stop cheating, because it doesn't allow you to min max. It doesn't allow you to meta build. It doesn't allow you to do any of the optimization for a character that you might want. How many times have you ever been handed a pre-gen that you were 110% totally satisfied with? You would have built this character exactly the same way. Almost never. There was one case where I was handed a pre-gen that somebody built, and they built it up a specific way, and I had a great time with it. It was playing Shadowrun. It was a troll who wasn't very smart but was super strong. And I'm like, well, I like that kind of character anyway, because it doesn't require me to role play a whole bunch, and I can just have fun being a big dumb brute and make everybody laugh, which is kind of what I like to do in games anyway. I'll be honest, I'm kind of a joker. I like people to laugh at the stupidity of the things that my characters do. So I don't necessarily have to be super duper min maxed. Big dumb brute solves all his problems with his hands. I'm happy. I don't have to play a super duper intellectual. If people want to get into some deeper role play with my character, I'm good with that. But I find I don't necessarily have to build a character who's good at everything. If they fail social checks, perfect. If they fail, well, basically that character doesn't do a whole lot of stuff that would require skills that they're not good at. I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you have your brute type character who's like really, really good at fighting, but not any good at anything else, it's like, okay, well, play into that. You don't have to be good at everything. You don't have to meta to be good at everything. You don't have to sit down with a guide that tells you exactly how to build your character so that they can do everything. And I see these published all the time online. How to build a super duper druid tank, god foe destroyer, whatever. And Pathfinder used to be really bad about that too. Actually, so was 3.0, 3.5. I'll never forget we had a player at our table who would level dip so much that pretty much their character was like the rainbow of classes. And he wasn't doing it because he thought it would be a fun and entertaining character. He was level dipping because he wanted certain abilities that character classes had at certain levels. Like he would level dip monk for a couple of levels so he could get, the monk abilities, the core monk abilities. He would level dip thief or rogue so that he could get the rogue abilities, especially the evasion. Oh man, he loved that rogue evasion. He would level dip into cleric so he could get the healing abilities. He would just level dip, level dip, level dip, level dip. And he ended up with like a super duper homogenous character who you think wouldn't be very good when they got to higher levels. But actually, since they had so many different feats and so many different abilities from so many different classes, they usually ended up with a character who was very hard to stop. Or even to be around or to play with, because it was kind of like, well, they can just kind of do anything. And I don't know, maybe that's the element of the game that really, I think a lot of the meta building goes against, the cheating. And that is, most people kind of show up at the table with a character concept, I want to be the brainy wizard, I want to be the broody barbarian, I want to be the sneaky thief or whatever like that. I think if you have a character in the party who steals the limelight from that other person's niche, that's not good gaming. Now, I mean, it is possible that, you could have several characters who are all good at the same thing. That is kind of what it is. That especially happens in cases where, everybody shows up at the table and they didn't build their characters together. But I find that those kind of things tend to work themselves out as levels progress. Especially if you're starting off with a first level party. It's like, okay, everybody is kind of alike at first level, okay? Ostensibly, how the game should play out at lower levels is everybody's kind of more or less equal, the same, not necessarily good at one thing. And then as your characters develop, over the next few levels, they kind of start finding their niche in the party and they start growing into whatever role it is they choose to play. But having said that, if everybody in the game builds their character that way, and then you have the one guy at the table who's like, nope, I've already mapped out my character from beginning to end already. I want to be, super god skill thief, have every skill under the sun. And thieves used to be really bad about that. Rogues used to be really bad about that. It kind of becomes not fun for everybody else. And we used to make this joke all the time at the table that rogues were actually university professors because they had all the skills. They got like 8+ skill points at first level, which was like more than anybody else. And they had the largest number of skills available to them of all the classes at first level. So it's like, yeah, the rogues are at university teaching the wizards how to do magic and all this other stuff because they have the highest number of skills. But Kit says, next time we're in chat, remind me to tell you my horror story of my first attendance at a Pathfinder Society PlayCon. It was the very definition of mismatch expectations. I've played some Pathfinder Society. I used to play all the time in Pathfinder Society. I always thought Pathfinder Society was I thought Pathfinder Society was very interesting because it showed very clearly how they had ruined their own game and how they knew it. And this is, again, going into the cheating meta thing, okay? A lot of these, not so much conventions, but society type things, like, oh, you're part of this. They'll give you they don't necessarily give you pre-gens. They let you build what you want to. However, they limit what you can take. They may not allow certain classes. They may not allow certain races. They may not allow you to take certain feats. They may not allow you to take certain spells. I have a GM that I play with who told me at one point that their character during a con used not stinking cloud, but cloud kill, and the GM at the con was not aware of how devastating cloud kill was. So after that, they ruled that the character couldn't use that spell anymore, couldn't have that spell anymore. And Pathfinder Society, like I said, it limited your classes, it limited your choices, it limited what you can do. And by that definition, I'm kind of like saying, well, all right, so you obviously knew that your system was unbalanced to begin with. You knew that your system had flaws. And rather than go back and address those flaws, either with updates, errata, or whatever, you just chose to rigidly enforce a set of rules that cut these things out of the game, so players showing up to the game wouldn't have access to them because you knew that they were broken. Which to me that says, okay, that's bad game design. And that is another form of, I suppose, cheating, is the fact that maybe not so much in like early editions of D&D, like, D&D first edition, AD&D, you pretty much only had the player's handbook. And that was it. Everybody knew the player's handbook. They knew what was in it. And that was all there was to it. There was no real cheating beyond that. I mean, everybody knew what was in there. Everybody had access to it. That's what they used. But Unearthed Arcana came out. And look at what happened. People just lost their minds because it introduced a lot of shit that was broken. A lot of stuff that either wasn't play tested properly, a lot of stuff that didn't work out so well. I admit I loved the Barbarian from Unearthed Arcana, but if you look back at the Barbarian and Unearthed Arcana, yeah, that was the partyless PC. If for, don't like magic, don't like this, don't need this, don't do this, got this. Barbarian, I don't need a party. I am a badass all by myself. A party of barbarians would be like horrifying for a GM. Because it was broken. It didn't work really well. Either they hadn't play tested it very well, they hadn't play tested it enough, or whatever. But yeah, I think most old players who played AD&D will tell you, it's like, yeah, that Unearthed Arcana is where they screwed up. But kind of getting back to my point on cheating, like I said, there's lots of forms of cheating. Cheating begets cheating. But ultimately, what happens with cheating is you lose. Whether you're a player, whether you're a GM, you lose when you cheat. No matter how you cheat. Because you're cheating yourself out of having fun. You're cheating yourself out of having the enjoyment of screwing up. You're cheating your GM out of having a little bit of fun when you make mistakes or when you miss a roll. You know, as a GM myself personally, I don't think I really build super duper hard encounters. In fact, it's pretty safe to say I myself build blow through encounters. You know, I realize combat is tough. Combat is where characters can get killed. Combat is where players experience, 80% of their frustration, 90% of their frustration because they, one missed dice roll, could land your character at 0 hit points. So I don't particularly build very tough encounters myself. Unless, of course, it's a module or something that I'm running, in which case I'm just going by whatever they've got set up in the book. But for the most part, I want people to have a good time. I want people to have their characters feel like they're pretty powerful, like they can take out a whole bunch of mooks and be successful and have a few laughs, do some stupid stuff, miss a few dice checks and things like that. I don't try to build overpowered encounters. I really don't. And that's probably because I was a cheater. And how was I a cheater? Well, I was a killer DM when I first started out. Because the very first module I ever picked up and learned how to run D&D on was the Tomb of Horrors. That is not a module that you want to hand to a brand new GM and tell them, go run this. That is the worst example for a new GM to pick up and learn how to use and run. Because it shows them all the wrong things. For starters, as I've always said, Tomb of Horrors is a fuck you dungeon. It's not designed to do anything in particular. It's just designed to fuck players over as hard as possibly can. And it's not even... I don't honestly see how Tomb of Horrors could be fun for anybody to play. I really don't. There really isn't that much in there that you can get because the levels you're supposed to play it at, the treasure that you get is not commensurate with the amount of pain that your PC is going to go through to get it. It just isn't. So pretty much all the Tomb of Horrors is designed to do is just to humiliate PCs, to make PCs look bad. It is the worst example of pass-fail gaming. It is the worst example of wanting to make players cheat. It is also kind of a GM cheat in a way, because it is so unfair. A GM isn't necessarily there to ensure that you have a good time, right? That's really not the GM's responsibility, but the GM is responsible for setting up encounters and things in order to let you have a good time. How you choose to interact with it is up to you, right? The best way to have fun with the Tomb of Horrors is walk away. I'll be honest. I'm just, that may be a shitty thing to say, but yeah, if somebody's going to run Tomb of Horrors, just tell your GM is like, okay, my PC decides this is not going to be worth my effort and time to try to do, so I'm going to go find something else to do. Maybe there's a red dragon or something we can go hunt down, or let's do anything else but go into this place. This is a bad idea. And I know they nerfed it with Tomb of Annihilation and gave you all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, I don't care. It's not a fun dungeon. But for me, as a fledgling DM, it was a terrible dungeon to learn how to play the game on, because it gave me the impression that that was the DM's entire goal, was to humiliate PCs, to make them look bad, to kill them, to find ways to kill them, you know. And so my first few years as a DM, I was a killer DM. I mean, I would engineer unfair shit. I would throw uneven odds. I would, I didn't even care. I was just mean. I mean, let's be honest. But then something happened. I got to play one campaign where I was running this. It was one of the Slave Lord campaigns. Well, the entire party was down to just one player. One PC was left. But against all odds, that guy was succeeding. And it got kind of cool, because it was like, wow, this this dungeon literally just killed off like all the other characters in the party, but this one guy is managing to succeed, and he doesn't have a choice. He has to find his way out of the caves that he's stuck in, right? Because that last Slave Lord's dungeon is like, they start the PCs off with like nothing, thrown down into a place to die. Well, against all odds, he succeeded. He got through it. He got out. And I thought, wow, that was so much more fun. That was so much more rewarding to see him succeed than it was just to kill his character off, or to kill off all the other characters because of bad dice rolls, because of unfair this and that. So that kind of started me on my turnaround, where I started realizing, like, I don't have to cheat as a DM. I have an unlimited number of monsters. I have an unlimited number of traps. I have an unlimited number of bad things I can do to PCs. I don't have to win. I win when they're having fun. I win when I'm having fun, laughing at either the stupid things that they do, or the missed checks that they do, or just seeing them succeed, And it should be the same thing for the players. The players shouldn't have to cheat to win. They shouldn't have to feel like they need to cheat to win. They shouldn't feel like the GM should need to cheat for them to win. They should just have a good time playing. Pass, fail. It's not a pass, fail. It's, are you having fun? Did your character succeed at everything? No. You goofed up a few times? Okay. Did everybody at the table have a laugh when that happened? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, you won. Good job. Did your character survive? Yeah. Okay. You won. Good job. That's winning. So instead of cheating, instead of fudging your dice or re-engineering your character to be, God, or any of the other various ways that you can metagame to cheat, instead just concentrate on having a good time. You're there sitting at the table with a bunch of other people who hopefully have, personalities that are more interesting than, say, your average bottle of Carmex. Right? Talk to their characters. See what their characters are all about. Find out how much backstory they really do have on their characters. Hey, you're a dwarf. Is it true that all dwarves don't shave their beards? I don't know. Just ask some stupid questions and stuff like that. Be funny. Do things. Don't let the dice rule your game so much. You're gonna fail your dice rolls. You're gonna succeed on your dice rolls. You're gonna crit. Sometimes your dice are gonna fuck you all night long. I didn't make a single successful roll an entire gaming night. That kind of sucked, but we still had a good time because I was still at the table with friends. We still had some good interactions. We still had fun in other ways. But just don't let it be all about pass fail. Don't cheat to win. It's not worth it. Everybody loses when you cheat. That goes for DMs, that goes for players. But anyway, all right. Well, I'm well over an hour. I didn't think I'd be able to go an hour on this, but this is a topic that I have had a lot of thought on. Don't know what happened to Grim today. I hope he's okay. But I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll catch me next week. I think I might actually be able to lure Venger Satanus to come talk to us next week, so that might be cool. So anyway, y'all have fun out there in YouTube land, and we'll see you tonight, because I've got another Twig stream tonight. Till then, y'all take care.
Look! A Dungeons and Dragons rhyme! Exercise.